Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. I stepped up to the small wooden podium in front of the circle of chairs. I've always disliked public speaking, a fear that began in junior high speech class. My knees were trembling, and I worried my voice would falter. Facing the group of men seated before me, I inhaled deeply to calm my nerves and started. "Hello, my name is Gary." I introduced myself after a brief pause for another breath. I continued, "And I am dealing with infidelity." I waited for about 20 seconds, observing their reactions. Most looked surprised by my statement, showing a mix of disbelief and neutral expressions, but none seemed amused by my candid confession. Well, not exactly. To be labeled in such a way angers me greatly. This is my second meeting, and I have listened to a half dozen of you tell your stories, so I decided to share mine. Unlike most of you, I am still married. My lawyer advised me to get counseling for anger control while we worked up my divorce case, and I get my ducks in a row. So far, it seems to be helping. "At least I haven't killed anybody yet," I remarked, met by smiles and soft laughter. Before all this started, I did not think I was a gullible man. I had no idea. I was unobservant, I offered. I honestly thought I was a loving husband and hopefully soon a proud father. I never considered myself a victim, nor did I ever think of myself as a loser. I was never the one on top of anything I did, but I was up there in the also-rans, or those who came close in high school. I was in the top third of my class academically. The same with college. I graduated with a solid 3.4 GPA, more than enough to get into graduate school, where once again I did fairly well while I worked as an accountant. Upon graduation and with a little more experience under my belt, I got a good job as a CPA and thought I was on a solid track to success. Then I had the rug pulled out from under me. Academic and then financial success is one thing, but to have the one thing that defines your core ripped away is the worst a man can face, I said, feeling the weight of the words. For your wife to tell you that you are not good enough for her, well, maybe not directly and verbally, but rather indeed as devastating. I continued, feeling myself begin to hyperventilate. I grabbed that little podium and held on like it was a life raft in a choppy sea. "Sorry, I got a little off target there," I said as I regrouped. Two men in the front row gave me a thumbs up and a nod to tell me they understood and for me to keep going. "Let me backtrack," I said, collecting my thoughts. "I'm not going to boast about my wife's appearance or share intimate details of our relationship. I will say we had a healthy connection and a fulfilling life together. She was my best friend and my life partner, or at least that's what I believed. Ava and I met in college the semester before I graduated with my bachelor's degree. We hit it off and married that next summer. I got a decent job right away as an accountant so I could afford to pay for her to finish her degree. Then, after the year of work experience I needed, I went on to get my CPA while Ava became a paralegal. Lately, she has announced aspirations to go to law school." I snorted. "Good luck with that. I will not be the one paying for it," I said, eliciting a few chuckles from the audience. With 2 sets of college loans, we held off having kids or even buying a house until we both felt comfortable we could afford the expense, I explained. Last year, after 5 years of marriage, we bought an older 4-bedroom home, and I completely remodeled it. I gutted the interior to the studs and even changed up the floor plan to suit us. I turned it into just what Ava and I envisioned as our future home. My older brother is a contractor who specializes in remodeling older homes and turning them into the dream his clients envision. I worked for him every summer while in school, so I felt I had the abilities needed to gut a house and rebuild it to make it the best it could be. My brother helped me when I began, and even got his subcontractors to give me special rates for those things outside of my own expertise. Of course, several of those contractors were already my accounting clients, so part of the work was quid pro quo. In other words, I don't have a whole lot of money tied up in the house itself, but the value, if I sold it now, would be triple what we have invested in it. Ava got her dream home and seemed thrilled and content, I continued. 6 months ago, she announced she was ready to get pregnant, and it only took 2 months before she disclosed she was with child. I should be over the moon, and at first I was. The thing is, the baby is not mine, or at least I am pretty sure it is not. And at this point in time, I sincerely hope I am right, I admitted, feeling a mix of emotions wash over me. I'm not exactly sure how long my wife has been cheating on me, but looking back, I suspect off and on for much of the past year, at least. She had ample time to stray while I busted my hump, working as an accountant and renovating our future home evenings and weekends. Now, I'm sure many of you wonder how I found out about Ava's activities. I got several nods. Nothing like some of you might expect. No late nights or quick showers. When she came home, it started with a simple phone call. I overheard her talking to someone on the phone while she was in the bedroom, thinking she was alone. They were discussing what to pack for an upcoming business trip. I assumed she was talking to a woman. What caught my attention was when Ava mentioned a particular item and how she might not be able to handle intense moments much longer. She referenced her first pregnancy and compared herself to her friend. I learned that Doug, her boss's first name, was involved. She laughed about not wanting to use certain toys and mentioned having to work on herself to prevent me from getting suspicious. She talked about having to disguise her activities when she returned from trips. Ava also expressed concern about the father of her child, suggesting that Doug could be the father due to their encounters. She admitted to avoiding certain tests out of nervousness. The timing she mentioned aligned with a specific trip and my own late work hours. Most nights, I was unaware of the full extent of her activities, as she would distract me in other ways. She believed I had never caught on. I saw a series of grins around the room. Okay, I know some of you are thinking I am making this up, that I could not possibly remember a conversation with that much detail, especially if I was upset, I clarified. Well, I've listened to that conversation dozens of times in the past few weeks. I recorded it on my cell phone. I said, seeing a few nods and expressions change from obvious skepticism to acceptance. I called the security guy my brother uses for help. He installed a couple of cameras and recording devices, plus provided a few I could put in her purse and briefcase. I caught her being unfaithful in my bed a few times while I was at work, and got some revealing audio conversation. She is involved with both her boss and the secretary. The secretary is married with a couple of kids. From what I gather, they have encounters when they can, and the boss is intimate with one or the other at work. Sometimes the women are intimate with each other. It's surprising they manage to get any work done, given all that's going on. I want to bring up one thing the doc asked me, I continued. He asked me to try to get into Ava's head so I could understand her motivation to seek intimacy outside of our marriage. He wondered if perhaps she was frustrated with our long hours apart, and she needed some physical and emotional contact to make up for it. I shook my head. Well, I'll tell you all the same thing I told him. I don't care. She was unfaithful, plain and simple. If she was feeling lonely or in need of affection, she could easily have said something. Asked for a little more us time. But she didn't. She decided to go off with someone else. The reason doesn't matter. Okay, that's about all I have. Thank you for letting me vent, I concluded. I am in the process now of divorcing her. She left this morning for another out-of-town meeting with a corporate client. And yes, the boss and secretary are going. I stepped away from the podium. One of the men, a big grizzled guy, spoke up. Why didn't you go teach that guy a lesson? Of course, I have no idea who did it, as I was not there and had a good alibi. But the guy who was with my ex ended up with a broken jaw and was seriously hurt. Nobody saw a thing. Random attack, I said, recalling the incident. I told them I hadn't yet faced the woman I was about to divorce. I was still planning. I said, meeting some skeptical stares. The main reason I'm attending these meetings is to manage my anger. Sure, I've thought about giving Doug a piece of my mind in a not-so-friendly manner, but I'm not going to risk prison. And that tough guy attitude of fighting for my partner like some hero is nonsense. She's not my partner if she chooses not to be. Another guy asked if, after hearing the conversation, I started noticing any changes in my wife's intimacy due to her friend's toy. I haven't been close to her since the night I overheard that conversation, I admitted. I tested positive that very night and had been sleeping in the guest room to quarantine ever since. In fact, I might hold the record for testing positive 3 weeks. Actually, I looked it up online, and it says in some cases it could last a month. And with the pregnancy, it's just safer for me to stay in another room. I grinned, receiving some smiles and thumbs up. I stepped away from the podium. The group moderator, the therapist, stepped forward and thanked me for being honest and sharing. He asked me to continue to come to the open meetings, as well as our private counseling sessions. I told him I would consider it. I might need to blow off more steam later, but for now, the lion was kept in its cage. I had only gone to him at my attorney's insistence. My lawyer said I was on the edge of losing it and needed a relief valve. Just making plans to divorce Ava was not enough to temper my anger at these gatherings. Unlike at Alcoholics Anonymous, the conclusion was marked by everyone sharing a drink at the local bar. "You haven't even confronted her about her infidelity?" a man asked. Surprised, I simply nodded. Wow, I lost it. Confronted my wife, and then ran the other man off. She had the nerve to inform me about her plans with him as he arrived to pick her up. Smirking. All the while, she said she wouldn't return until the next day. If he hadn't been so quick, things might have turned ugly. I was damaging his car, trying to reach him when the police showed up. That's the reason I'm attending these sessions, court-ordered for anger management. How about these other guys? I asked. Are they in the same situation? I'm asking because some seemed quite interested in my story. I wonder if any are here for the opportunities. The guy gave me a blank look and said, "Opportunities." Yeah, you know, like the old joke. A teenager goes to confession and admits he got intimate with a girl at school. The priest asks if it was Mary something. The kid says no. The priest asks if it was Susie something again. No. The priest asks about a third girl, Joan something again. No. So the priest tells the kid to say 10 Hail Marys. The kid steps outside, and his friend who has been waiting asks him what the priest said. The first says, "He told me to say 10 Hail Marys and gave me 3 good prospects." The other guys at the table laughed. "You seem like a stand-up guy," one guy said. "If later you want somebody to handle a situation while you're in church with many witnesses, let me know." I asked him how he knew I wasn't a cop setting him up. "Because I work for your brother sometimes as a drywall subcontractor. I remember seeing you on the job a while back. You probably don't recognize me because I used to have a big beard and longer hair. Too noticeable, if you know what I mean." I made a mental note to ask my brother about the guy's background sometime. I told him I was still just getting everything organized as my lawyer advised. Then I'd proceed with the legal actions against her. I limited myself to 2 beers. I was surprised at how much better I felt as I drove home. Maybe there really was something to that. Letting people, even total strangers, know your troubles, crap confession, or letting your demons out, may be good for the soul. But I had work to get done. I was on a mission like I had mentioned to the guys at the meeting. My soon-to-be ex-wife had left for the week with her boss and the secretary, June. They planned to be away the entire week to meet with a corporate client. I suspected the work would be done in 2 days. I was aware it was a pretense and had an idea of their real intentions well before they mentioned they might stay to enjoy the jazz festival on the company's expense the following weekend. Ava was going to get comp time, so she'd have a few days off the next week. If I could take a break from my work to spend some time together. But I knew better. She was just trying to keep me content and in the dark. 2 weeks later, I walked into the meeting room a little late. The others had taken their seats while the therapist was trying to get the meeting going by talking about how releasing your inner demons verbally was better than lashing out physically and risking criminal or civil consequences. I was not trying to make an entrance, but the room broke into cheers as soon as I stepped inside. "Glad to have you back, Gary. I know these guys want to hear the rest of the story from the man himself," my therapist announced. "Okay," I said, grinning, showing a joy that wasn't real. But for the moment I was all right. I approached the podium. A couple of weeks ago, I shared my unfortunate story about how my wife was unfaithful with her boss, and she might even be carrying his child. Not just that, but the legal secretary was part of their secret encounters. Today, I'll tell you the rest of what happened when I shared my knowledge with you. I hadn't informed the unfaithful man's wife, or the other woman's husband of my discoveries. It wasn't because they didn't have the right to know, but because I didn't want them to react impulsively and ruin my strategy. I intended to give my wife a surprise. She wouldn't forget. Not in a pleasurable way, because she might have liked that. I waited until Thursday night of that week before informing the others about what our spouses were up to while away. I apologized for the delay and explained my reasons. Then I mentioned my plan to have Ava confronted at the airport upon their return on Sunday afternoon. I recommended they seek legal advice and provided my lawyer's contact information. I urged them to refrain from alerting their spouses about our knowledge of their indiscretions. Once the initial shock subsided, we began to discuss the situation. I learned that, as in my case, each of the unfaithful partners called home every night, professing their longing and desire to be with us. We all recognized the deceit in their words. Janice, urged by me, decided to take her children to visit her sister and brother-in-law in Alexandria. She planned to seek their support before confronting her husband, Doug, when he returned. This wasn't Doug's first indiscretion. Janice also had to manage her two teenagers. Bill, married to the secretary, couldn't take the weekend off from managing the dealership's maintenance department. He vowed to avoid contacting his wife, June, expressing a moment of anger that he quickly retracted. I shared with him how joining the support group helped me overcome similar feelings, which lightened the mood with some laughter. Anyway, I told both what I did with my finances and explained why removing half of our savings in checking account balances, etc. in my case, that was not much. But they each admitted to having a fair amount in their accounts. I told them I was not going to cancel my credit cards until the last minute, but would pay the bill out of the joint account to make sure my wife paid her half. I left them to stew on what they needed to do and went home. "I'm sure you guys heard what I did at home. And it is all true," I said, met with cheers and applause. I took a half vow. Yes, I spent the week dismantling my home. By dismantle, I mean I took it apart, but did not damage a single item. Some of you might remember from my earlier explanation, but I did most of the work renovating my house myself with a little of my brother's help. What I did was take back that work. I reversed it. I had to leave the sheetrock up with the texture and paint, but the carpet and the air conditioning system were about all I left untouched. I disconnected every appliance and moved it away from the wall. Stove, dishwasher, refrigerator, all unplugged, with even the connecting wiring harnesses removed. Every bit of hardware was carefully bagged and attached to the appliance. I even took out the garbage disposal and left it in the middle of the kitchen floor, with the sink and faucets all taken apart and removed. I decided to leave the kitchen cabinets. I could have taken them down and did take a few that two of us could lift easily after loosening the retaining bolts. But that was just to show the soon-to-be ex. Her pretty kitchen was no more. I also left the kitchen counters alone as I had used a one-piece system that I could not take away from the wall without damage. That was not the case in the bathrooms. I drained and removed the toilets, took the vanities apart again, even taking off the faucet handles. We even cleaned the edges of the vanities and sinks to remove plaster and caulk. When we were finished, it looked like a pile of used bathroom fixtures. Only a few bare pipes and cut-off valves poked out of the walls. The tub and shower stall were untouched for the same reason I left the kitchen counters. Next, I took the bed and dresser apart as much as I could. The bed was easy. The mattress and box springs came apart quickly and were stacked in the hallway. All I could do with the dresser was to empty it. All my wife's clothes were put into our bedroom closet, which of course no longer had the pretty louvered doors. Our furniture looked nice and actually was very expensive, but like a lot of furniture nowadays, it was screwed together. We bought most of ours unassembled. I disassembled everything that originally came that way. My wife had not lifted a finger to help put them together. The shelving units lay in pieces on the floor. The credenza that held my books and all my wife's little knickknacks was collapsed with all the hardware carefully bagged. I wanted to make sure nothing was damaged. The last things to remove were the ceiling fans and light fixtures from each room. The only thing I left was the chandelier in the dining room. But I took the light bulbs out of that. Oh yes, I removed every electrical switch and plug socket in the house. We kept the wires, even though the electricity was off. I'd had to contract out for the air conditioning system to be installed, so I left that alone. I'd put in the water heater myself, but left it intact as well. Now, you may be wondering what I did with all the stuff I took out of the cabinets, shelves, and off the walls. Well, I want none of that stuff, as it would remind me of the bitch. So we spread it across the floor of the master bedroom. I mean, every dish and glass, every little figurine was placed carefully from the front of the closet to the door. You could not walk from the door to the closet without clearing a path first. Well, I take that back, as the door was not there anymore either. Nor were there any doors hanging except the exterior doors, which I left in place for security. I explained before, I am an accountant. Well, I kept a receipt for everything we bought to put into that house. My wife and I paid for it out of our communal assets, so I was going to give her back half of those appliances and fixtures, just without the work or what I called sweat equity I had in the house. My wife had done virtually nothing to help except pick out the appliances and help plan the renovation. As I watched a few of the mobile appliances like the coffee pot and microwave, it'll give my ex something else to argue about. I got some appreciative laughter. By the time her plane set down at the airport, everything in the house that I had assembled or installed had been taken apart. I got a call from the process server, who handed her the divorce papers and sat back to wait for her to come home. June, the secretary, had driven them to the airport in her van, so she dropped them off. My brother and I were waiting with a couple of the neighbors who wanted to see the rest of the show. They'd been watching me take apart the house all week and could testify where I had been and what I was doing while waiting for the cheaters to get home. We had been consuming the contents of my liquor cabinet and eating the steaks from my freezer. I'd kept back. All the rest of the food was taken to Ava's mother's house earlier in the week. I told her my freezer had gone out, but that did not explain all the canned goods and condiments I dropped off. The poor woman was too confused to ask what was going on. I knew she'd find out before long. June stuck around only long enough to let Ava and Doug out of the van. I wondered why Doug even came home with her. I walked around front, leaving the others to watch from the side of the house as Ava clambered out of the van, followed by Doug, her lover. Both were fit to be tied. While she was yelling and waving the envelope she had been given, he was angry, demanding to know what kind of lies I might have told his wife, and saying he was going to bury me legally for casting aspersions on his character. I had filed for divorce on the basis of adultery, and named him as one of the parties. As you all know, the courts do not really care about the reason for a divorce, but my claiming adultery put a new light on the problem, or rather added a bit of embarrassment, because it would be part of the public record. About that same time, Doug's wife arrived with her sister. I knew Ava's time of arrival as I had been tracking her cell phone, so I'd given Janice a call. They were on their way. Janice had already phoned me to tell me part of what she found when she returned home after her weekend away. She asked if I had been to her home that weekend. I told her truthfully I had been working hard at my own house and barely went anywhere else except to my brother's to sleep at night. Apparently, she could not park in her garage when she got home. Her whole driveway was filled with car parts, Not just any car parts, but the pieces that had been her husband's beloved 1965 Ford Mustang. It was his pride and joy, and he would show it off to every visitor to his house. The car had originally been his father's and was Doug's first car. It held great sentimental value. His father had put it into storage, and years later, Doug had the car totally restored. I'd heard people laugh and comment that he loved that Mustang more than his wife and kids. That might have been an exaggeration, but not by much. Of course, Doug was a little upset to see his wife drive up, and he immediately began with a lame comment that whatever she might have heard was a total lie. She did not tell him what was awaiting him at home. All of us stood outside while my wife took her suitcase inside. Then came the scream from inside the house. Ava came to the door yelling, "What did you do to my house?" She hadn't had time to inspect it thoroughly. All she saw was the clutter in the living room. I'm surprised she didn't notice the missing blinds and drapes before entering. Perhaps the surprise of being approached at the airport had thrown her off. Every window was exposed because one of the first things I did was take down the blinds, disassemble them, and fold the drapes. After all, when I shut off the electricity, the only light during the day was natural or from the generator we used at night. I stepped inside, followed by my brother and the rest of the entourage. I calmly informed my soon-to-be ex what I had done. I was preparing the house to split our assets 50-50ths. She demanded to know where her stuff was. I waved my hand around the floor and then told her if she was referring to her clothes and personal items, they were all safe and sound in the bedroom closet. When she went to look, she was not happy. I had never heard her issue such a shrill scream in all the years we had known each other. Somebody had called the police, and they showed up to listen to my wife scream and yell about how I demolished her home. I carefully explained what was going on to the first cop on the scene. He immediately called for his supervisor. I do not know exactly what he said, but within a minute, at least 3 more units showed up. I called my attorney when I knew Ava was on her way home, and he finally showed up. He apologized, saying he thought he better change clothes before he arrived. Ava began to rant about where she would go for the night and demanded I be arrested. My lawyer nixed that last idea, telling the police I had done nothing illegal, no crime had been committed, and that this was a matter for civil court. Doug demanded his wife take him home, but Janice refused, and then she goaded him, asking why he never looked at his phone. She had texted him a few hours before. He still did not look, thinking whatever she sent him had to do with his alleged cheating. Now this is conjecture on my part. What he told his wife was he was busy after Ava was served at the airport, and he would clear up any misconceptions about the business trips. At this point, I was trying to monitor 3 or 4 conversations at once. I did answer Ava when she asked what I had done with her car. She and Doug decided that she would drive him where he needed to go since his wife told him he could walk as she was not about to let his cheating ass get into her car. I told Ava very truthfully her car was exactly where she left it in the garage. She stormed back inside the house. Not 2 minutes later, she stomped back outside and complained the garage door would not open. I told her I was not surprised as the electricity was off. Plus, I had dismantled the garage door opener. She loudly demanded to know how she was supposed to get her car out. Doug heard her and told her to just pull the emergency release to open the door. She had no idea what that was, so he went inside with her. They came back out, and he demanded to know where the handle for the release was. I shrugged and told him it was around somewhere, carefully marked like every other item I had taken apart. The police were taking notes the whole time, asking for statements from one and all. Then Janice dropped her bombshell that she had not called the police yet, but she had an issue at her home. She showed her cell phone to the police lieutenant who seemed to be in charge. I watched his face change to total incredulity. He looked at me. I told him Janice had shown me the photos, but I had been here at my own home all weekend and had multiple witnesses. With Janice refusing to take Doug home, they called June back. She arrived disheveled, having been crying. Her husband had met her outside their house with all her clothes stuffed into plastic garbage bags. He'd helped her load the bags into her van and told her to leave and not return until she saw her lawyer. He had told me his plans the day before. So now Ava and Doug put their suitcases into June's van. Janice told him once again he ought to look at his phone. He finally did, and then let out a scream that almost matched those of Ava's. He yelled for June to get him home fast. I'd given Janice a suggestion when she first called me to tell me what she found, and she had already acted on it. Her brother-in-law had stayed at her home. The cops were finished with what they could do at my house. We'd all given our statements, so my brother and I followed the rest to Doug's home. A television news van was already parked in front of his house. The reporter was interviewing Brett, the brother-in-law, about what the family found when they brought Janice home from her weekend away. Later, I found out the cameraman had already taken full video of the area. The story Brett told was that they could not pull all the way around the house to park in the garage, as the garage doors and most of the drive were blocked with car parts. The garage was around the end of the house, and the area was totally obscured from street view. Nobody stopped me from following them up to the house. The scene was great. Most of you men have put together model cars when you were kids, I am sure. Well, what I saw looked just like what you see when you open a model box, with the exception of the plastic bars holding the little parts. In the center of the drive was a car chassis. To each side lay the doors. Behind the car sat the trunk, and in front, the car hood. I was a little surprised the fenders had not been removed as well, nor had the windshield. Virtually every other piece was, though. The engine sat in front of the chassis. Radiator, fan, water pump, starter, generator, carburetor. All the major parts had been removed. All the belts and hoses were placed neatly in rows to one side. The transmission and whole drivetrain sat behind the car. The wheels were removed, along with the brake assemblies. Even the seats were removed and sitting off to one side. I'm telling you, it was impressive. I'd never seen a car totally, or almost totally, taken apart. Everything was laid out very neatly. Not that any of that mattered. Doug was overcome with emotion. He cried out loud, and tears streamed down his face as he fell to his knees. He yelled that Sally was destroyed. Curious, I inquired of Janice about Sally's identity. Nearby, a television reporter observed as police surveyed the car and the surrounding area. I couldn't help but burst into laughter when Janice revealed that Doug had named his car Sally after the classic tune Mustang Sally. I know you all heard about that part. Once the news reporter broadcasted her report, the story was picked up by the network and then made the full rounds on social media. They played the song Mustang Sally as a backdrop. None of us spouses were hiding. We all made sure the 3 cheaters were named. Doug accused each of us of the damage to his car. But we all had ironclad alibis. June's husband Bill worked all day Saturday at the dealership and was with their kids that night, and all day Sunday. He had the expertise to dismantle the car and possibly the resources, but the investigators could not link him to anybody who might have been responsible. Apart from Doug's, not a single fingerprint could be found on any part. The police had even checked the lug nuts that had been carefully piled together. Janice was with her sister and brother-in-law for the weekend, and even her kids testified to that. She loudly proclaimed she had not even thought of doing anything to the car, but if she had, it would have been with a hammer. And she was still considering using a hammer on the parts and finishing the job. Even the cops were laughing hearing that. Of course, because of the careful way the car had been dismantled and the parts not damaged, I was the #1 suspect. But I also had an alibi. First of all, I am not a mechanic. I know home repair and renovation, not how a vehicle might be put together. I did not have much more than a couple of screwdrivers, and a few wrenches anyway. Plus, I was busy taking apart my home, under the amused and watchful eyes of my neighbors. The whole event at Doug's house was a circus. Eva was there because she had no other transportation other than June, who had been kicked out of her home by her husband. My father-in-law soon showed up after receiving a call from Eva. He stood wide-eyed, watching the extravaganza unfold. The reporter called me for a follow-up the next day. She'd heard what I'd done to my home and wanted to add that as an angle to her story. I gave her one of the 20 or so flash drives I had made of how I systematically dismantled my home. She condensed 5 hours of video into a 2-minute television segment. Those flash drives proved to save my butt so far. I gave them out like candy at Halloween. Of course, since I only had 20 drives, I'd also included the evidence of the 3 culprits cheating. Doug had got a restraining order for me to not publish a thing about his infidelities. But by the time the order was issued, almost all of those drives had been distributed. I had no control when some of the evidence, which included them discussing their affair and even video of a few of their encounters, made the rounds on the internet. Even my father-in-law got a flash drive when he asked me if I might be overreacting to perceived events. Doug felt humiliated being caught on camera in a compromising position with his 2 partners. The explicit details of their encounter were omitted from the television broadcast, but surfaced online. The fact that they were recorded in such an intimate moment was frequently discussed, even on TV. Now, as of today, my status is still up in the air. I intend to push for the divorce to be finalized as soon as possible. But Ava wants to stay married for the sake of the baby. The paternity test, which my wife initially protested, showed I am not the father of her unborn child. I had to pay extra to get the test expedited. But since the child is not mine, I'll get some of my money back from the communal assets. Ava wanted the opportunity to discuss the matter privately and wait until the baby was born to test. But I had made it so public, she had no option but to submit to the test, despite her attorney's advice. I have no idea what she plans to do or if Doug will step forward. He might not even be the father, for all I know. That is not my concern. My wife got an attorney who claimed I destroyed my home. Mine, of course, claimed I merely took back my work. And none of the components were damaged, and everything is ready for resale. From the last I heard, the investigation into who dismantled Doug's Mustang has come up empty. The working theory is it has to be a team of experienced mechanics, somebody with the expertise to remove the major components and not leave a total mess. Oil, transmission fluid, coolant, and even brake fluid were drained, and none of the parts were damaged when taken apart. Even Bill, June's husband, admitted to the investigators what it would take to take the car apart like that. Components that might be compromised, like the manifold covers and valve assemblies, were left alone. Bill told me privately he would like to hire the men as they were fast and obviously knew their stuff. He told me as much as he loved it. He had nothing to do with taking the Mustang apart and asked if I had. I honestly told him I had not. Doug paid through the nose to get the parts picked up and stored. Janice told him he had 2 days to remove the junk, as she called it, from her drive, so she'd have access to her garage. Otherwise, she'd hire a couple of neighborhood boys to pile the scraps under the carport where Doug had kept the car. He knew she was serious. Before any of you think I came out on top of any of this, I was not unscathed. The very next day after Ava returned home, I was immediately fired from my job. I knew my boss is a good friend of Doug's. Doug sent him clients, and in turn, he recommended Doug when the need arose. My boss had even been the one to originally suggest Ava go to work for Doug. When I was told I was fired, I leaned over my boss's desk and asked him point blank if he had been involved in any inappropriate behavior, and more specifically, I asked if he had been intimate with my wife. He denied everything, but that did not keep me from having a little talk with his wife to make the suggestion I suspected he might have. My ex-boss's claim I was poaching clients was dismissed when I demonstrated I'd brought many of them to the firm in the first place. A few others made the statement they did not trust the man after he fired me. I've agreed to handle all the accounts who followed me pro bono for 2 months while I worked for my brother for minimum wage. Ava's attorney claimed I am deliberately avoiding having a substantial income. I claimed I was simply helping friends while I determined my future career. I opened my fledgling part-time, pro bono accounting firm in an unused office in my brother's building. If any of you need an accountant, let me know. I got a few cheers from the audience. I felt a little better about my circumstances, but I had to admit I lost a wife, my home, and my dreams, all irretrievable. 3 weeks later, once again, I entered the support group for anger management, which some of us jokingly called the Betrayed Partners Support Circle. I approached the podium. I recognized many faces here. You're probably here for the same reason as me. Controlling emotions is tough. To be precise, it's tough to maintain control constantly. As my therapist, and likely yours, says, there's a thin line between depression and anger. I'm consulting both therapists now, though not by choice. I'm aware some of you are here by court order. I'm here at my sister-in-law's insistence. We were all sitting at the dinner table when my 8-year-old nephew asked loudly, "Uncle Gary, are you always upset because Aunt Eva was so mean?" Well, upset and mean are trigger words for my sister-in-law. When asked where he heard that, my nephew pointed at me and said he overheard me talking to his dad. My sister-in-law looked at me to resolve the issue, so I said very carefully that it's really not polite to use the word mean. But yes, I was very upset with Eva. Then I encountered another difficult moment when he said, "Okay, I won't say that again. I like her. It's too bad she's so unpleasant." You can imagine the glares I got from my sister-in-law. My brother was no help at all. He just stared at his plate and shook as he tried to keep from laughing. My sister-in-law told me very quickly that if I wanted to keep my boys, I'd better learn to watch what I said around the kids. Now my 6-year-old niece got into it and said, "Boys, I didn't know Uncle Gary had any kids. Where are they?" My sister-in-law said the boys were me, her dad, and brother. Then the little 6-year-old, bless her heart, said, "Oh, so when you told me, Sandy, your girls were sore and tender from too much rough play, you meant because I fell and skinned my knee." To be honest, I did not hear how she finished because I was laughing too hard. But my sister-in-law was beet red. Okay, long story short, if I want to live with my brother and his family, I continue my therapy, including these group sessions. I announced I cannot afford to live on my own. Right now, I have no income. I wanted to decrease what I made for the divorce, but people do not realize how difficult it is to even find an apartment without verifiable income. My sister-in-law is a lovely woman and generous to a fault. She just does not want her kids influenced negatively by my misfortunes. More keywords to go along with those others I mentioned. So where are we? Aside from my having upset my sister-in-law with what her kids overheard from my conversations over the last 3 weeks, I've done the bare minimum in terms of earning an income. I've made only slightly more than Ava did before I lost my job. I had the impression she earned so much because she was giving her boss special attention. My lawyer advised me to stay quiet about it as our small income difference means I wouldn't have to pay alimony. He warned me not to ruin that. Janice kicked Doug out and filed for divorce. His beloved car, Sally, is in storage. Their divorce, as you can imagine, is already messy. She told me clearly she wants to make him suffer in any way she can. I know she didn't mean that literally, but I hope I'm never called to testify if something happens to him. Doug is facing significant problems at work. He mainly deals with corporate clients. There's a rumor that his negotiations might have been influenced by inappropriate personal benefits from Ava and June. All three strongly reject these claims. However, some clients believe the rumors and are moving their business away. The firm in general has had some problems with other areas as well. They have been handling sexual discrimination and harassment cases. Some of those clients have changed attorneys and filed grievances with the bar, saying the firm cannot handle their own internal affairs when it comes to sex in the workplace. I understand Doug's continued presence is more of a liability than an asset, and he is close to being asked to leave. His situation at work has been made worse by the number of people driving past his office, playing Mustang Sally by Wilson Pickett at full volume. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I'm not sorry for him, although I'm pleased he might lose his job. Ava's income could decrease significantly. She earns a lot more than most paralegals, especially given her brief experience. However, there are rumors that her salary includes compensation for personal favors. June, among the three involved, may still save her marriage. She's working towards making amends. She confessed to her husband her enjoyment of being in control during intimate moments. She insisted that her interactions with Doug were limited to a certain extent, and she acknowledged Ava's compliance with her demands. June enjoyed the sense of authority. She occasionally indulged in private moments with Ava. Now she's leveraging the situation involving their child to maintain her marriage. Bill is contemplating reconciliation if June consents to a legal agreement. She has persuaded him that the rumors regarding her and clients are unfounded. My marriage, on the other hand, is over. I wouldn't keep her even if the baby were mine. All we need to do is split the assets. The judges, and I use that term in the plural, since Ava appealed the original decision, declared I was justified in taking back my own sweat equity in my former home. I had not damaged any component, but merely uninstalled them and left them ready for reinstallation or sale. I gave Ava possession of everything I had placed in our bedroom, but she had to pay to pack and remove it all immediately, or I would consider it community property. Her father helped her pay and coordinate that. I wanted the stuff out of the house quickly but refused to lift a finger to help. Ava tried to get me to help so we could talk. I refused to talk to her without my lawyer present. My sister-in-law went to observe and make sure Ava only took the stuff from the bedroom. My soon-to-be ex-father-in-law finally viewed the files I gave him and told me privately he understood my actions but was still obligated to take care of his daughter. I think Ava moved back into her old room at their house. At our first joint meeting with our attorneys as part of the separation of assets, I suggested Ava take her half of the household fixtures and appliances. She could pick out what she wanted, and I'd take something of similar value. She glared at me when I told her I'd give her first choice of toilets. She wanted to buy out my half for face value, saying she would hire a crew to put it all back together. I knew what she and her lawyer were thinking. The whole was worth much more than the sum of the parts. As an accountant, I also knew how much I could afford to offer her and still be below the break-even point. I kept offering more than her as a counter. She could not get the financing anyway. My brother was backing my play financially. Ava refused to sell to me for any reason. Her attorney eventually demanded everything be sold at public auction, and the proceeds split. My attorney argued weakly. We would lose too much. He lost that decision, which did not bother him, nor me. Ava had tried but could not find a buyer offering near as much as I had offered. My brother originally offered to buy the shell of a house for half what my ex and I had invested but was refused. At auction, he finally got it for 70%. The house was in great shape, but few of the investors were willing to outbid my brother. I'm sure several of those investors were interested, but knew my brother would never work for them again, and other people in the trades would have followed suit. Ava's lawyer protested his client's lack of compensation briefly, but had to concede the auction was his client's demand, and they had unfortunately refused my much higher offer. So basically, I lost my ass settling my divorce. Unemployed and with only a small percent of my assets left, I am still living in my brother's guest room. To compensate him for my rent, I began work to restore my old house. Everybody knows I was the one who took my home apart, but nobody has any idea of who dismantled Doug's beloved Mustang, let alone begin to provide a bit of proof. Doug even hired his own investigators. All have come up dry. My financials were examined to see if I had paid anyone. I had to provide them access to my cell phone and computer. June's husband, Bill, did the same. No link to anybody who might have done the deed has been found. The whole affair has been fodder on social media after originally appearing as a topic on network television. You can imagine the notoriety I get as the man who took my house apart. I am constantly asked how I really took the Mustang apart and promised they'd never tell. Then I get congratulated for something I did not do. Several of the guys stood and congratulated me right there amid the laughter of others. I moved away from the podium. The therapist asked who wanted to go next. Everyone shook their heads. One guy said he'd wait until next time to share how he confronted the man with his wife and made him leave his house without clothes. We all headed for the bar. Epilogue. Hey Gary, don't I get a discount as a new client? Paul Frew asked. He was the drywall subcontractor I'd met at a support group. I recall you offered the guys who joined you after you left your last job 2 months of complimentary accounting. Hell, I gave you a free setup in my system. I offered with a smile. That takes some time. You think you deserve more? You do work for my brother, not me. My house already has all the walls up. I was referring to my former house, which my brother now owns and rents to me for a minimal amount. I'll be buying that house back for what my brother paid for it in a year or so, when we figure enough time has passed. My ex-wife, Ava, could not claim fraud. Or is it because I gave all the guys in our group the discount on their taxes this year? I asked. Nope. None of those things, Paul grinned. I figure I deserve it for my strength, pressing on a floor jack to lift a Mustang up, so the wheels and tranny could be removed. I'm not much of a mechanic, but I can stack parts around. Also, telling your brother, I knew some guys who could help out in a bad situation, and especially my cousin who is a mechanic. When he told me about a Mustang he wanted dismantled, I could not see through tears of laughter. As Paul walked away, I made a mental note to remind myself, never underestimate a drywall subcontractor with connections. And perhaps when people ask if I dismantled Doug's Mustang, I should just shrug, smile, and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.